Viewers, what to make of Tipu Sultan? Is he the unifying nationalist he is made out to be in the countless TV portrayals of his storied life? Is he the relentless harrier of the British we have come to know through our history books? Does he deserve to be placed on a pedestal as he has been for much of independent India's recent history? The quest for the truth about Tipu has been joined by Vikram Sampath, who is famous for having written the most authoritative treatise on the life of another Indian icon, Veer Savarkar. In his 900-page rollicking and accessible biography of Tipu Sultan, full of anecdotes, Vikram Sampath takes us down a series of twisty paths in the search for the truth about Tipu. So what actually has he found? To talk a little bit more about the scholarship and Tipu Sultan, let's go straight across to Vikram Sampath. Mr. Sampath, thank you very much for speaking to me. It's a pleasure. This is yet another tome that you have assiduously written, 900 pages. Could you first of all just hold it up for our viewers so they get a sense of what this immense body of work, pun intended, is all about? There it is, viewers. That's on your screens. You can see it. It's almost a doorstop, actually. You can use it as a pillow if you want, but more importantly, it is your window to the life and times of Tipu Sultan. It is also your window to a great deal of facts that haven't been yet known about Tipu Sultan. And let me tell you, Vikram Sampath is the man to go to. Now, Vikram Sampath, first of all, let's start with the brass tacks, so to speak. When was this book written? What was the inspiration? How long did it take you? Clearly, this is not overnight. Clearly, this is not 3 months. Clearly, this is not 6 months either.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahul. Such a pleasure always to talk to you. And I think in-depth conversations on matters of history, I've enjoyed always having them with you. This book, certainly, as you mentioned, it's not something that came up all of a sudden. The book has been in the making in my head for now close to perhaps 15 years. Quite ironically, my foray into literature and historiography was thanks to Tipu Sultan. There was a very famous serial those days on Doordarshan, if you remember, called The Sword of Tipu Sultan, where Sanjay Khan played the lead role. And that serial led to a lot of disturbances in different parts of the state that I come from, Karnataka. Because in their attempt to glorify Tipu and his father Hyder Ali, who actually usurped the throne of Mysore from the Hindu rulers, the Wadeyars, the producers of the serial tried to show the royal family in an extremely poor light. The Maharaja was shown like an obese retard who was dancing with the court dancer, the Maharani, like one of those typical, vamps from an Ekta Kapoor serial, all the time conniving and conspiring. And there were lots of protests in different parts of Karnataka. I'm talking of the 1990s. And if you remember, even the studio caught fire, and I think Sanjay Khan's face got burnt and so on. And there were lots of murmurs in Kannada media here that it is the curse of the Wadeyar for the kind of portrayal that he had given to him. And so, as I was probably a boy of 12, 13 years of age who really hated history in the manner in which it was taught in schools. But these protests, these talks of all these curses and all of that, I don't know, it kindled something in me, and from there on began a completely self-motivated and a self-funded initiative to get on to the discovery of the truth about just that one king and queen who were misrepresented in the serial. And soon, over a course of 10 years, it expanded to the entire Wadeyar dynasty, who ruled for 600 long years, one of the longest reigning royal houses in India. And one section of the book was on the Interregnum period, or the intermission, the interval between where a legitimate government is disposed and a usurpation occurs. And that was the 40-year interregnum from 1760 to 1799 by Hyder Ali and later his son Tipu. That was a small section of the book. Now, I was still a babe in the woods. I was probably 26, 27 when this book came out. A couple of talks I was giving in Bangalore about Tipu Sultan and the Interregnum era, and I was reading out letters that he wrote to his own officers, where he's very clearly mentioning, go to Calicut, destroy, so many temples, destroy churches, kill infidels. I was just quoting it verbatim, and that led to a huge ruckus in the hall. Some people disrupted the event. One of them even, and the event had to be, aborted. I was ushered backstage, and my poor father was sitting in the audience, and someone went and thrust a letter or pamphlet or something in his hand and said, "You have only one son, and so, if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he speaks." And a couple of weeks later, there was some article I wrote about the divans of Mysore, in which there was a reference to Tipu, and that led to protests again. And right in the heart of Bangalore, in MG Road, I remember my effigy also being burnt by some of the protesters. Now, obviously, we at home were not prepared for something like this, and my parents, particularly my mother, was extremely hassled about this, and she extracted a promise from me that I'll never talk about Tipu Sultan in public. Of course, I kept my promise to her till the time she was alive. We unfortunately lost her in 2018, and since then this book has been re-germinating in my mind. And it took me around 4 years later to revisit all the sources that I was already familiar with about Mysore history, to revisit them, go deeper into that, and that's how this book came out. It's been a labor of love, something that's been brewing in my mind for long. I know I've broken my promise to my mother, but now that she's not around in flesh and blood, I can only hope and pray that from whichever heaven she is in, she will protect me against any kind of unintended, harm or consequence that I might face after this book comes out.
Well, first of all, sorry about your loss, but fundamentally, you're seen as an author who redeemed the image of Hindutva icon Veer Savarkar, and that was a masterful exposition over 2 volumes, and you rescued him from this sort of, if I can say, pejorative sort of narrative woven by the left to discredit his image, etc. Now you've turned your attention to an individual who the left has built up again in our minds. Do you worry that your scholarship on Tipu will be dismissed as an attempt at misrepresentation?
I mean, people can always say what they wish to say, but as you have also seen, Rahul, almost 200 pages of the book, of this very mammoth tome, is footnotes and references. So for every claim that I make, there is a backstory, there is a source, and I think that is a historian's biggest shield or protection. And in my case, irrespective of what the outcome or what the dismissals or the attacks that might come or might not come, they don't matter much to me anymore. I think as long as my conscience is clear, and my clear and only adherence to the craft of my profession of being a historian, as long as I adhere to that and illuminate the archive, that is what a historian needs to do. Over the last 4 years, while I revisited most of these sources, I made several trips to archives across India and also outside, whether it was in London, the British Library, the India Office Library there, Paris and other places, and there's copious amount of documentation around him, his various communications with people. And Tipu was a very, very prolific writer. Unlike his father, who was illiterate, he was very well read, and so he wrote copiously. So we get a lot of first person account in Persian. For a brief while, I even tried to learn Persian myself so that I could read the original manuscripts. That ended in a bit of a disaster, so I rather used the help of a translator. So most of these are primary source materials in Persian, in Marathi, the Peshwa Daftar documents, which have a lot of correspondences between Pune and Mysore, which happened in those troubled years. And the 18th century, Rahul, is an extremely important one, which we sometimes gloss over. It's a century of chaos. You had 2 major powers, so to say, having collapsed by then. One is, of course, the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj towards the end of the previous century, and the death of Aurangzeb. And with this, the centrifugal forces had dissipated in the Indian polity, and in its place came lots of principalities, all vying for independence, be it the Nizam in Hyderabad, the Nawab of Awadh, Bengal, the Marathas later under the Peshwas emerging as a main force. So it was a theatre of the of chaos, of the absurd, And in that you also have the European parts, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and of course the British and the French muddying the waters. So to zoom into this very important century, which I think holds a lot of lessons for us, because that was the century when India capitulated and we had the onset of British colonialism. So a lot of revisiting of this era is important, and that is what I've tried to do in this book, completely based on facts, keeping my own whatever predispositions or prejudices, if any, aside. And that is how I think objectively a historian needs to, as I said, illuminate the archive for a general public who may not be either interested or well versed in accessing sources in their original.
So now let's get into the substance of it. 300,000 words, and almost a third, just shade under third of the book is devoted to Tipu's father, Hyder Ali. Now, clearly this was a conscious choice on your part. Why did you spend so much time introducing us to Hyder Ali?
Yes, in fact, I wanted that as a separate volume, in fact, because it was just so, Hyder's is a fascinating story. As you've read, he was someone who, from rags to riches, literally building his, his career, his life, his empire brick by brick. His ancestors are supposed to have migrated from somewhere in the Afghanistan, Punjab and so on, and settled down later, first in northern Karnataka, where his father Fateh Muhammad was serving the Nawab of Sira. And the father dies prematurely and owes money to a debtor, and to actually recover the debt, the person puts Hyder and his elder brother Shahbaz into these kettle drums and has them beaten upon and so on. And in such a piteous situation, the Maharaja of Mysore takes pity on these fatherless boys and pays the ransom to release them. So from that situation, in 12 years, if you see the arch of his career, he ran with the hare, hunted with the hounds, a typical Machiavellian kind of politician, ruthless, only driven by this thirst for power and for climbing the ladders of power in Mysore. In 12 years, he manages to overthrow and usurp the throne of his own benefactor, the Maharaja of Mysore, and becomes the Sarvadhikari, or the supreme dictator of the kingdom. Now, this is a story in itself, which intertwined also with the politics of the time that I mentioned, the Carnatic wars that raged in South India, the wars of succession where Hyderabad, Arcot and all these kingdoms were using Europeans and other Indian powers in their internecine squabbles. And as a result of all of this, the only person who made the maximum hay while the sun shone was Hyder Ali. And so I think his story becomes a very important foil to that of Tipu Sultan. Once you see Hyder, and you actually, as a biographer of both father and son, I would probably rate the father much higher, because he was a man who actually strove so hard to build this kingdom, build his own kingdom, and he knew how to maintain that as well. So this was a very important feature of the father. The son got it all on a platter and eventually ended up losing it, thanks to only his foolhardiness, his lack of foresight, the sense of hubris, arrogance, and that whole intoxication that power and absolute power brings to a person.
So how do you attribute Tipu's, I suppose it's a zealotry, how do you contrast that to his father? So is it because Tipu found himself being raised by people who were perhaps extremely austere and were not fond of the sensual pleasures of life, were very pious? Is that, I mean, must have been something that made Tipu predisposed towards this sort of austere and extremely conservative point of view?
I think the seeds of bigotry and this kind of strict adherence to tenets of your own faith were laid or sown in his mind in his childhood because of this teacher and so on. And he was, as I said, a very prolific writer and a reader. So he read a lot. In fact, from his palace after his fall, the British, got thousands and thousands of books in several languages, largely Arabic and Persian. He was well versed in these languages. He would read a lot, but a lot of these books too from his library, while they are of other things, astronomy and physics and history and so many poetry and all of that, several books are about jihad, about what a mujahideen needs to do. In fact, one of his attendants, Abdul Shustri, he actually writes this book called Fathul Mujahideen, which details the detail of how a mujahideen should actually conduct a jihad. So I think somewhere when the father was away in battle and so on, the son seems to have absorbed a lot of this, the austerities of the faith. And immediately after coming to power in 1782, the first 5 years for him were a dream run. It was a dream that any ruler could have. He concluded the Second Anglo-Mysore War, which was midway through somewhere, and his father had died in the middle of the war. He conducted it superbly to his advantage with the Treaty of Mangalore, which actually was the last document where an Indian power had an upper hand over a European power. So that was a great success. He had managed to vanquish the Marathas during their subsequent attacks on Mysore, because Pune was in turmoil. Madhav Rao had died, and you had the whole Barbhais there after Narayan Rao's assassination and so on. So he managed to vanquish the Marathas. All the smaller rebellious Palegars, Coorg, Malabar, he managed to vanquish all of that. Internal sabotage, he managed to vanquish that. Attempts by the displaced royal family to dispossess him, that also he managed to subdue. So this huge sense of I can do nothing wrong, the hubris, the arrogance that came in, that is a story in itself. In fact, there are a couple of anecdotes where his followers and army men tell him not to proceed forward because they expect a cloud burst, and he pompously says, you think I cannot command the clouds to stop their thunder on me? I can do that. But then sadly for him, the clouds actually burst, and there was huge rain in which the entire army got stuck. But that apart, he had this highly bloated self-image. In fact, Colonel Mark Wilkes, who's a historian of Mysore history, he documents instances where Tipu even goes to the extent of being so blasphemous as to compare himself with the Holy Prophet, and in some cases even think that he is better than him. So when someone gets into this kind of megalomania and thinks that religion is that aid to come your way, I think downfall is also very, very imminent. To me, Tipu's story is like a classic Greek tragedy. Somebody who gets the power, the joys of sovereignty on a platter from his father, who's worked so hard for him, and because of these kind of negative attributes, you actually squander it away bit by bit, and in the course of 17 years, you dig up your own grave, and you bring misery both for yourself as well as your future generations who lost power thereafter.
That's interesting, because you obviously paint Tipu as this individual who was quite obsessed with carrying out jihad, etc., who was quite given to a certain piety and committed excesses, and you have detailed them, which we will talk about. But somehow in the Indian imagination, it's Aurangzeb that figures as the real iconoclast, so to speak, when it came to Hinduism, Hindu temples, etc. But Tipu wasn't very far behind. How is it that the Tipu story sort of got extrained from the mainstream, and Aurangzeb became the linchpin of this?
Yeah, I think Tipu was the Aurangzeb of the South. I think numerous reasons why I think these aspects of Tipu did not come out, though I'm sure everybody knew about it. At least in Karnataka, people knew. The South doesn't feature so large in the larger narrative of Indian history. We're so Delhi-centric in our approach. So I think every little detail about Delhi, its rulers, all of that gets the larger, audience. The South, you cherry pick what you want. The other is the manner in which, of course, our history has been written post-independence, where all these uncomfortable truths, which are real facts of history, we labor under some false misapprehension that talking about these truths will somehow upset the social cohesion of India today, that communities today will feel upset if you mention these things, which are a fact of life. You can't wish away your past. You can't whitewash it or say these things never happened because you think it is uncomfortable. And ideally, the Muslims of Karnataka or the Muslims of India need not think of Tipu or Aurangzeb as their hero. He was as barbaric as anybody could be. So if he was a villain for the Hindus and Christians of South India, he should be considered as much of a villain for the others too. Now, and I think popular media was employed in a wonderful manner to build this image of Tipu. You had, as I mentioned, the sword of Tipu Sultan. I think that was the main window to most Indians today to understand this man, the hero worship of the man, that very marchy tune of the title music. That is what comes to people's mind when they talk about Tipu Sultan. And the fact that I think he fought the British, that also kind of redeems him or somehow saves him from his horrendous social report card. Just because you fought against the British, that doesn't take away all the other negatives that your very stormy rule has had. Post independence, I mean, this is the common narrative even in popular media, whether it is cinema and so on. The British is always the bad guy, and the Indian who's the subaltern, so to say, the David and Goliath fight, where the Indian is fighting against the British. So anybody who does that is the hero. But truth be told, in the two wars that Tipu actually fought himself against the British, he lost both of them and lost them horribly. The 4 Anglo-Mysore wars that were fought, the first 2 were fought under his father Hyder, where Mysore scripted unprecedented victory. The first Anglo-Mysore war, in fact, Hyder goes to the very gates of Madras. The British could have been exterminated from India at that point. He makes them sign an extremely humiliating treaty, something that makes sends shockwaves back in London. The stock prices of the East India Company tumbles down and all of that. The court of directors are so livid with what the company has been doing. The second Anglo-Mysore war too, where Tipu of course played a very important role in both these wars as a deputy to his father. In fact, there is the Battle of Polilur during the course of the second Anglo-Mysore war, where he defeats this man called Colonel Bailey, which is painted actually at the Darya Daulat Palace of Srirangpatna. It's called the Lali Bailey Yuddha. So there the entire, it's like a propaganda art about how Bailey is shown as this very effeminate person sitting in a palanquin, twiddling his thumbs and so on, and these two are the macho men who are riding their elephant and horse and defeating him. Sir Hector Munro, who was the hero of the Battle of Plassey, Buxar, defeated the Mughal, the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh. He literally throws away all his guns and ammunition in the water tank in Kanchipuram and runs away to Madras to save his life. So that was the terror which Hyder could actually instill, in his opponents, and Tipu learnt those tricks of the war very well under his father. So that's why he managed to conclude the second Mysore war with a lot of positive gains to himself. The Treaty of Mangalore, as I mentioned earlier, in 1784. But after that, it was a downhill. So the 2 other wars he fought himself, the third Anglo-Mysore war with Lord Cornwallis as his opponent, he lost half his kingdom. He had to give war indemnity of about 3.5 crores, for which he also had to pledge away his 2 sons, Abdul Khalik and Muizuddin, as hostages to the British. And then of course the last Anglo-Mysore war against Richard Wellesley, who decided that let's take it to the kill and the finish, and the final Anglo-Mysore war, where he was killed in Srirangapatna on 4th May 1799. So even if we look at this heroism against the British narrative, actually Tipu was not somebody who won any war against them when he independently fought those. Under the shadow of the huge banyan tree that his father was, he certainly made a lot of gains. So I think a lot of story, the popular story, the folklore around Tipu has been couched in so much of grandiose narrative that the real Tipu really struggles to come out in front of our eyes.
Well, there's this very interesting exchange between Tipu and his mother, which is quite instructive and gives you an insight into how deep, into how sort of he was evolving as a person and a monarch. This is an interesting exchange.
Yes. In fact, this mother of his, Fatima or Fakhrun Nisa, she was variously called, she was a very, very authoritative woman. In fact, there's a very funny anecdote that Hyder, while he was this terror-inspiring, macho man that he was, not only in India but even outside, he was extremely scared of his wife. So he would go with a lot of trepidation to her chambers, and she would give him such a tongue lash, and he would come running away, and then he would have this drunken revelry with his friends, where he says, I find it so much more easier to fight the British than face my wife's tongue. So she was this very controlling, authoritative woman, and she had her influence on her son too. Tipu was swayed by her all the time. In fact, including the the choice of the girl he had to marry. Hyder had a choice, but the mother overruled that and brought a girl of her own choice. And finally, of course, Tipu ended up marrying both, but the mother kind of always prevailed. So the anecdote you're referring to is much after Hyder's death, when in the open court, we have this very interesting man called Purnaya, who was the Diwan. He was a very close confidant of Hyder, but also continued under Tipu. A very astute, very able, diplomat of sorts. Now, in the open court, Tipu makes an offer to him saying, you're such an intelligent person, why don't you join us and convert to Islam? Now, Purnaya, being the artful badger, somehow, hurriedly says, yes, Sahab, as you please, and so on, and he makes a hurried entry. The mother is actually sitting behind in the women's section behind the parda, and she's supposed to have come out and given her peace of mind to Tipu, saying, your father never did this kind of thing. If you embitter people and lose the confidence of your near and dear, then your ruin is not too far away, so you better mend your ways. So she gives him that advice, but obviously that advice fell on deaf ears, because that was basically the reason why he lost out so many of his confidants. This overtly overt push for religious conversion and so on, and adherence to Islamic tenets, all of that led to him losing the confidence of so many people, particularly the Hindus. And after the loss in the Third Anglo-Mysore War particularly, his confidence in the Hindus, particularly the Brahmins, almost evaporated, and that is what led to his eventual downfall.
Well, thank you, Vikram Sampath, as always, engaging, always effusive, and always so easy with the words. Thank you so much, and your book, really a testament to your scholarship as well as your ability to tell an interesting story in an interesting manner. So thank you very much. It's been lovely speaking to you once again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rahul.